My name's Frank Mitchell, and a year ago at my daughter's wedding, my wife of 30 years stood up, took another man's hand and said she'd found someone who made her feel alive again. The room went silent. My daughter cried. And me, I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I just smiled and handed her an envelope that ended everything. So sit tight, because what started as the worst night of my life became the moment I took it back, piece by piece, with quiet precision. This is my story. The story of how I turned betrayal into freedom and revenge into peace. If you're watching this right now, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from, because I want to know how far my story has traveled. I want to know if somewhere out there, someone understands what it feels like to have the person you trusted most look you dead in the eye and betray you in front of everyone you love. My husband Frank and I have decided to part ways, she said, her voice ringing clear through the hall, right between the clinking of glasses and the low hum of jazz. It took me a few seconds to understand what I'd just heard. I was sitting beside her, my wife of 31 years, when she raised her champagne glass and said those words at our daughter's wedding dinner. The crowd froze mid-laughter. Forks stopped. The saxophone player missed a note. And Linda added, her hand resting lightly on the shoulder of the man beside her. I'm in love with someone new. With Mark. Mark. My business partner. The kid I mentored, the one I treated like a damn son. He stood there beside her, smug and half-drunk, his tie loose, his hand still on her bare shoulder. And when his thumb began to trace lazy circles on her skin, I swear the room temperature dropped 10 degrees. My own daughter Emily, the bride, sat there in her white dress, tears already brimming, whispering, "Mom, what are you doing?" The only sound after that was a glass tipping over somewhere at the far table. Then nothing. Just silence thick enough to choke on. 31 years of marriage. 31 Christmases. 31 anniversaries. All of it detonated in less than 20 seconds, right under the golden chandeliers of the Bristol Country Club. Linda looked straight at me, spellfaced, as if she'd just announced a promotion instead of a betrayal. "Frank," she said, "I didn't want to do this behind your back. You deserve the truth." Tonight felt like the right time. The right time. Our daughter's wedding. The day I'd been saving for since the night she was born. I didn't shout. I didn't flip the table. I didn't even blink. Because in that split second before rage could drown me, I saw it all so clearly. The smirk on Mark's face, the relief on Linda's, the confusion in every guest's eyes. They expected a scene. They expected me to break. But what none of them knew was that I had been waiting for this. Preparing for it. I reached into my suit jacket, pulled out a thick ivory envelope, and laid it neatly on the linen tablecloth between the champagne flutes and the wedding candles. My hand didn't shake. Not even once. "For you, Linda," I said quietly. "A little wedding favor from me to you." Then I stood up, buttoned my jacket, and looked around the room at my daughter's terrified face, at Mark's pale convulsion, at my wife's painted smile, cracking by the second. I leaned close enough for only her to hear, and whispered, "You should probably open it now." And then I walked away. No yelling, no tears, just the sound of my shoes crossing that polished wooden floor, while the room stayed frozen in disbelief. I remember catching the reflection of my face in one of the mirrors near the exit, expressionless, ghostly calm. It was the face of a man who'd already buried something long before tonight. I was halfway across the lobby when I heard it, the scream. A raw, broken sound that tore through the air and made even the waiters stop in their tracks. It was Linda. Her voice ricocheted through the ballroom, shaking the chandeliers. "Frank, what is this?" she shrieked, her words twisting between panic and fury. Then Mark's voice joined hers, lower, but frantic. "You son of a... Where did you... How did you get this? I didn't turn back. Not yet. I just kept walking toward the glass doors leading outside, where the night air waited like a reprieve. The stars above the golf course were indifferent, shining over my daughter's ruined reception. But inside that envelope, tucked between layers of cream-colored cardstock, was everything I'd been gathering for the past 6 months: the photos, the bank statements, the proof of what she and Mark had done, the proof that would cost them everything. You might think I should have felt satisfaction in that moment, but I didn't. What I felt was an emptiness so vast it could swallow a man whole. The kind that comes after a long illness, finally ends. Not relief, not triumph, just the quiet recognition that something has died, and it was dying long before you noticed. I stopped just outside the doors. Through the glass I could still see the cows inside the wedding cake, untouched guests, whispering behind napkins, my daughter sobbing into her husband's shoulder. Mark was waving the papers, his face red, while Linda tried to snatch them back. And there it was, written all over her expression, not guilt, but fear. Good. Let her feel it. A man doesn't spend 3 decades building a life, a business, a home, only to have it stripped away by the very people he fed and trusted. No. When that happens, you either crumble or you evolve. I turned toward the parking lot, my footsteps echoing. The night smelled like rain and regret. Somewhere behind me, someone was still calling my name, but it wasn't my daughter's voice. And that made all the difference. By the time I reached my truck, I could already hear the whispers in my head, the ones that had kept me awake for months, leading up to this night. Don't let her see you bleed, Frank. Wait. Watch. Let her think she's winning. When the moment comes, make sure she destroys herself. I opened the truck door, sat down, and just breathed. My hands were steady, my pulse even. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror and said it out loud for the first time. This is the end of something, but maybe it's the beginning of me. That line hit harder than any scream could. Because here's the truth. No one tells you about betrayal at 55. It doesn't just break your heart. It rewires it. You don't explode. You freeze. You start seeing people for who they really are. And the world stops being kind, but it finally becomes clear. Linda thought she was announcing her freedom tonight. She thought she was humiliating me. But what she really did was announce the end of her own safety net, the unraveling of the life she built on my shoulders. And Mark, poor arrogant Mark, he didn't even know yet that every dollar he'd stolen, every signature he'd forged, every false invoice they'd slipped through our company books was already copied, notarized, and filed with my attorney. That envelope was just the opening act. As I started the engine, the dashboard lights blinked on soft amber glow, spilling across the steering wheel. I looked once more at the reflection of the ballroom in the glass doors behind me. People were moving again now, rushing, arguing, trying to piece together what had just happened. And I smiled just a little. Not because I was proud, but because I'd survived the worst kind of truth and walked away standing. You want to know the strange part? I still remember the song the band had been playing right before it all exploded. Sinatra's "The Best Is Yet to Come." Life has a twisted sense of humor that way. That night I didn't lose my wife. I lost my illusions. And that, as I would soon learn, was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. When I look back now, I see a man. I barely recognize a version of myself that existed before the world taught me what loyalty really costs. 31 years of marriage sounds like a lifetime when you say it out loud. But when you live it, it's a slow erosion, not a single storm. I used to think Linda and I were solid, the kind of couple people pointed to and said, that's what real marriage looks like. We met in the summer of 1990 at a community softball game. She was 23, bold with that wild red hair that caught the sun, and a laugh that could make you forget everything wrong in the world. I was 24, working construction by day, taking night classes to get my real estate license. I remember the first thing she ever said to me: "You look like a man who carries too much on his shoulders." She was right even then. Linda had fire, ambition. She wasn't the type to sit still. She wanted the house, the kids, the security, but she also wanted the rush of building something. When I opened my first small brokerage firm, she was there every night, typing contracts, answering phones, baking muffins for clients. We were a team. And when I made my first real sale, a 2-bedroom house on Maple Avenue, she popped champagne in our kitchen and danced barefoot to Fleetwood Mac. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that felt like everything. For a while, it was perfect. We worked hard, raised Emily, took weekend road trips in a beat-up Chevy that barely made it up the Vermont hills. I can still picture Linda leaning out the window, wind in her hair, singing along to Tom Petty like she was 16 again. She had dreams of opening a small art studio someday, said she wanted to paint the world as she saw it. I used to think she'd do it too. But time has a way of sanding down the sharp edges of passion. After Emily was born, Linda's fire dimmed, or maybe it just changed shape. She stopped helping with the business, said she needed a break to focus on herself. I didn't argue. God knows she'd earned it. I kept the company running, told her to take her time. Back then, I believed in the kind of love that sacrifices quietly. The years rolled on. I was out chasing deals, signing contracts, watching the numbers grow. By the time I turned 40, we owned 2 houses, 3 rental properties, and a business big enough to have a staff of 12. People in town respected us. Clients called me Mr. Mitchell with that tone that said I'd made it. I thought success was proof of a good life. But somewhere along the way, Linda got lost in the quiet. She started filling her days with things that didn't involve me: book clubs, yoga retreats, spa weekends. "You work too much, Frank," she'd say. "I need balance." Balance. I told myself she deserved it. I told myself this was what happy marriages looked like after 30. Less passion, more partnership. Then the small things began. She started dressing differently: silk blouse for errands, perfume at noon. She got her hair done every other week, her nails always immaculate. When I asked why, she smiled and said, "Because it makes me feel alive." She began spending more, little charges at boutique stores, fancy lunches, weekend trips with her yoga group. I saw the receipts, of course. I always saw everything. But every time I asked, she laughed and brushed it off. "Don't be so suspicious, Frank. You're starting to sound like my father." That line cut deeper than she knew. Still, I ignored the signs. It's amazing how blind love can make a man, even one who deals in contracts and numbers for a living. I convinced myself she just needed space, that middle age was making her restless. I doubled down on work, thought, if I could just make more money, she'd feel safe again, grounded. That's what men like me do. We fix things with effort, with numbers, with sweat. But you can't rebuild something that someone else already decided to abandon. I remember one night, maybe 5 years ago, I came home late from a closing. She was sitting on the patio with a glass of wine, staring out at the yard lights. When I kissed her forehead, she didn't look up. She just said, "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" I laughed it off, told her she was just tired. But the way she said it, like a confession, meant for someone braver than me, it stuck. From that night on, I noticed the distance. The way she stopped reaching for my hand at church. The way she angled her body away when we watched TV. The way her phone was always face down on the table. I started to feel like a guest in my own house. The walls still had our wedding photos, our daughter's baby pictures, but the warmth was gone. Linda had a habit of humming when she cooked. Now the kitchen was silent. Even the smell of her perfume, once something that made me think of home, began to feel like an intrusion. I became a man of habits. Work, gym, dinner alone, rinse and repeat. You could call it survival, but really, it was denial dressed as discipline. Funny thing about betrayal, it doesn't happen all at once. It starts with absence, missed dinners, unanswered texts, a laugh that isn't shared with you anymore. Then one day you wake up and realize the woman lying next to you is no longer part of your story. She's just a character from an old chapter you keep rereading, hoping the ending changes hostage. I didn't know it back then, but my wife had already left me long before she said the words out loud. It started as most betrayals do, with something small. A bill that didn't belong. A crisp white envelope from the bank showed up one Tuesday afternoon. Linda always handled the mail, but she'd been at one of her yoga retreats that week, so I opened it myself. Inside was a new credit card statement, one I didn't recognize. Platinum, in her name only. These charges weren't huge, but they were wrong. Dinner at the Seaside Grill, a place that required reservations weeks ahead, and where the cheapest bottle of wine cost $100. 2 nights at a spa resort in Rhode Island, a purchase from Cartier. Cartier, my wife, who once scolded me for buying her a necklace because it was too expensive, had somehow developed a taste for Cartier. When she came home that evening, glowing from her trip, I was sitting at the kitchen table with the statement laid out in front of me. The same kitchen where we'd once planned our future, where we used to sit shoulder to shoulder, eating burnt pancakes on Sundays. Linda, I said, keeping my voice steady. You want to tell me what this is? She barely glanced at it. Oh, that. Birthday gifts, she said like it was nothing. You know Rachel from my yoga group, her 50th. I wanted to get her something nice. 3 nights at a spa, I asked. She laughed softly, that little breathy sound that used to melt me. Frank, don't be ridiculous. The spa was a group trip. The charge just went through on my card. Everyone paid me back. She brushed past me to the fridge, poured herself sparkling water, and sipped it like we were talking about grocery receipts. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. That night, Emily stopped by to drop off some wedding photos she'd been editing. I must have still looked rattled, because she sat across from me at the dining table, worry written all over her face. Dad, she said gently, don't start digging. Please. Mom's just restless. You've been working non-stop. Maybe she's acting out a little, but it's nothing serious. She reached for my hand, and for a second, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who used to run to me after nightmares, the one who believed I could fix anything. Don't make this ugly, okay? She whispered. Just don't make it worse. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I couldn't stand the thought of my daughter getting caught in the crossfire. So I did what I'd always done. I buried it. I convinced myself Linda was just bored, maybe a little reckless. Midlife crisis, maybe. I'd been distant, preoccupied with deals and deadlines. Maybe I'd stopped noticing her, stopped making her feel seen. For weeks, I tried to shake it off. But the smallest things started to gnaw at me. Her perfume changed sharper, bolder. She started answering calls in another room, laughing in a tone I hadn't heard in years. Her phone, once left charging on the counter, now followed her everywhere. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd smile and say, just friends. Every lie she told was thin as paper, but I let it stack until it became a wall between us. Then came the night that tore the paper clean in half. It was a Thursday late, long after the office had emptied. I'd been catching up on paperwork when I realized I'd left a contract folder at my desk downtown. I drove back to the office, the streets quiet, the building dark except for the security lights humming above the glass doors. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw headlights flash a black Mercedes coupe idling near the curb. At first I thought it was one of my agents. But then the passenger door opened, and Linda stepped out. She was laughing. That easy, radiant laugh I hadn't heard directed at me in years. The driver got out. Too tall, young tailored suit, the kind of cocky confidence that only comes from not having lived long enough to be humbled by life. Matt Reynolds, my business partner. 20 years younger. I'd taken him under my wing 5 years ago, helped him build his career, treated him like family. He walked around to open her door, his hand hovering on her lower back, just long enough to make my stomach knot. Linda tilted her face up to him, brushing her hair behind her ear, the way she used to do for me, the way she always did when she wanted to be admired. They didn't see me. I was parked across the lot, hidden in the shadows. I could have gotten out. I could have called her name. I could have gone over there and demanded an answer right then and there. But I didn't. I just sat there gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, watching the woman I'd built a life with smile at another man the way she used to smile at me. Matt said something that made her laugh again, and then he leaned in, not quite a kiss, but close enough that I could see the hunger in his eyes. It was the kind of look a man doesn't give his friend's wife. My stomach turned. My heart didn't race. It slowed like it knew the truth before my mind caught up. She climbed into his car, and as they pulled away, the reflection of their taillights slid across the glass doors of my office, red streaks cutting through the words etched on the glass, Mitchell and Reynolds Realty Group. I sat there for a long time staring at those two names. The irony of it all burned deeper than the betrayal itself. My name on his side by side, just like her and him. That night, I didn't drive home right away. I just sat in that parking lot, the quiet hum of the city filling the empty space where my heartbeat should have been. For the first time, I realized that maybe my marriage hadn't been fading. It had been rotting slowly from the inside out. And now I could smell the decay. After that night outside the office, something in me went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from peace. No. This was the kind that settles in when your heart stops fighting. When the truth becomes a fact, not a question. I didn't confront Linda. Not yet. Instead, I started watching. Every morning I left for work at the same time. Every night, I came home, made dinner, and listened to her stories about yoga trips and marketing conferences she sees. I nodded, smiled, and memorized every detail. That's the thing about betrayal. Once you know it's real, every word your betrayer says it becomes data. And I was done being blind. 3 days later, I called an old friend from my early real estate days, a man named Carl Hayes, who'd left the brokerage world to become a private investigator. Carl was the kind of man who didn't waste breath asking why, he just asked how deep. I need you to look into 2 people, I told him over coffee at a diner off Route 1. I slid a folded piece of paper across the table. Matt Reynolds and my wife. Carl looked up, eyes narrowing. You sure you want to know everything, Frank? Because once you do, there's no going back. I'm already past back, I said. He nodded once, pocketed the note, and left without another word. The next person I called was Eleanor Bennett, a retired financial attorney who'd been my neighbor for 20 years. She'd helped me through my first business loan, the kind of friend who understood both numbers and human weakness. When I showed up at her door that Saturday morning, she took one look at my face and said, "Who betrayed you?" "Maybe both of them," I said. I handed her a stack of printouts, bank statements, expense reports, company ledgers. Eleanor spent 2 hours at her kitchen table, glasses low on her nose, flipping through the papers with the precision of someone who used to dismantle million-dollar frauds for breakfast. Finally, she exhaled through her teeth and pushed the files back toward me. "Frank," she said quietly, "you're not imagining it. They're siphoning funds." The words landed heavy. "How?" "Through your development subsidiary. she explained, pointing at a highlighted line on one of the reports. Small transfers, 2-3,000 at a time, disguised as vendor payments, but the vendor doesn't exist. The account they're going into is registered to an LLC in Florida, Sunrise Holdings. Guess whose name is on the ownership record? I didn't have to guess. Linda Mitchell, she said flatly. And Matt Reynolds, joint holders. My pulse didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. I just sat there staring at the papers, at the proof that the woman who once baked me birthday pies was now robbing me blind with a man I'd treated like a son. How much, I asked. Hard to say, Eleanor replied. At least 70, maybe 80,000 so far. But what really worries me is the property purchase attached to that LLC. A tract of land in Sarasota County. It's in her name alone. So she hadn't just taken my money. She was building a future with it. My wife and my partner were literally investing in their getaway. Eleanor studied me for a moment, waiting for the eruption. Frank, I can help you file an injunction, freeze accounts. No, I cut her off. Not yet. She frowned. You can't let this continue. They're bleeding you dry. I know, I said, folding the documents back into the folder, neat and deliberate. But if I move too soon, she'll see it coming. I want her to feel safe, comfortable. I want her to think I'm still that fool who trusts her. Eleanor tilted her head, her lawyer's eyes narrowing. So what's your plan? I looked out her kitchen window, where her bird feeders swayed in the late autumn wind. To let her build her trap. And when she's standing right in the middle of it, I'll close it. Eleanor studied me for a long moment before saying softly, Frank, whatever you do, make sure it's not revenge that drives you. Make it justice. Sometimes, I said, standing, those two are the same thing. That night I went home to Linda humming in the kitchen. She was slicing strawberries into a crystal bowl, humming some soft jazz tune, her diamond bracelet catching the light. She turned and smiled at me, like nothing in the world was wrong. How was work, honey? Busy, I said, kissing her on the cheek. You're so exhausting, she sighed. Matt's pushing the new Florida project hard. He says we might make a real profit this time. I smiled back. I'm sure he does. Later. While she slept, I stood by the window and watched the moonlight cut across the backyard we'd planted together 20 years ago. Every flower bed, every fence post had been built by my hands. And now, the woman I'd built it for was stealing it piece by piece. But instead of rage, I felt something colder, cleaner. The man I used to be would have confronted her, begged for honesty, tried to fix it. But that man was gone. In his place was someone quieter, sharper, a man who finally understood that emotion is a luxury you can't afford when your enemy sleeps beside you. So I waited. And I planned. And every day, I smiled at her like nothing had changed. She thought I was broken. I was just getting started. Funny thing about the past, it always waits for you. You think it's buried under years of birthdays, mortgage payments, and Sunday dinners. But then one day, it shows up again, holding a mirror to everything you missed. 25 years ago, before the gray hair, before the company grew beyond a one-room office, I inherited my father's estate, a modest portfolio of properties and investments he'd built from nothing. My dad was an old-school man, straight-backed, quiet, and hard as oak. The kind of man who didn't hand you anything he didn't think you could carry. When he died, the lawyer handed me a thick folder and said, "Your father wanted to make sure what he built stays protected." Inside that folder was advice written in my father's own hand. Love is blind, son. Contracts are not. Linda and I had been married 6 years by then, still young enough to believe love could outlast anything. When my attorney mentioned a prenuptial agreement, something to protect the inherited assets, I hesitated. I didn't want to insult her. We were partners after all. But it was Linda who surprised me. She laughed, brushed my hand, and said, Frank, I don't care about that stuff. You could make me sign a napkin if it makes you feel better. You'd never betray me. Her voice was warm, full of that kind of trust that makes you want to live up to it. And so we sat across from each other at the lawyer's office, signing page after page of legal jargon neither of us fully read. One clause stood out, though my attorney's suggestion, not mine. A faithfulness clause. If either party was unfaithful, all financial protections for that person would be void. The unfaithful spouse would forfeit any claim to marital assets, property, or business equity. At the time it seemed symbolic, almost romantic a way to promise that our marriage wasn't just about money. Linda smiled when she signed it. "It's fine," she said. "I trust you." And that was that. The papers went into a safe, and we went on with our lives, raising our daughter, building our business, growing old together. For decades I never thought about that prenup again. Until Eleanor asked the right question. "Frank," she said one afternoon as we sat in her den, surrounded by open files, "did you two ever sign a prenup when you got your inheritance?" I blinked. "Yeah. A long time ago." "Why?" "Because if that contract still exists," she said, her lawyer's instincts lighting up, "and if it has a faithfulness clause, then everything she's doing, every penny she's siphoning, every affair, could legally strip her of any rights to your assets." I stared at her, the memory rising like smoke from a fire I thought was out. "I haven't looked at it in years," I said. "It's probably in the home safe." Then that's the first place we start. That night, after Linda left for one of her board meetings, I went into the study, unlocked the wall safe, and pulled out a folder so old the paper smelled faintly of dust and ink. The prenuptial agreement, 32 pages of typed clauses, signatures, and notarized seals. Eleanor came over the next morning. We sat at my dining table, the same table where Linda and I had celebrated every anniversary. Now it was covered in legal documents and cold coffee. Eleanor slid her glasses on and started reading. This section here, paragraph 18, subsection C. In the event that either spouse engages in extramarital relations or financial misconduct involving concealment of marital assets, all property protections afforded under this agreement shall be null and void. She looked up. "That's it, Frank. The faithfulness clause. It's airtight." I leaned back, the chair creaking beneath me. "So if she's proven unfaithful, she forfeits everything," Eleanor finished. "The house, the business shares, even her claim to the retirement fund. You'd retain full ownership." I rubbed my face, the weight of it hitting me all at once. The irony was staggering. The woman who used to tease me for being too cautious had just walked headfirst into her own legal grave. Eleanor gave a small, grim smile. She thought she was bleeding you dry. She has no idea she's already signed her own ruin. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked, distant, lonely. I looked at the old contract again, tracing Linda's neat signature with my finger. I remembered the way she'd smiled that day, so sure of her place in my life, so certain she'd never be the one to break it. All those years she must have forgotten this clause even existed. Or maybe she remembered and never thought I would use it. Maybe she still saw me as that citoyen who'd do anything to keep the peace. But peace was no longer my goal. I closed the folder slowly, almost reverently, and slid it back into the envelope. "Eleanor," I said quietly, "keep a copy of this. I'll need it soon." Her eyes narrowed. "You're planning something." "I'm preparing," I corrected. The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns fast. What I felt now was colder, sharper, the calm of a man who's done waiting to be hurt. Linda thought she had the upper hand, thought she could humiliate me, empty my accounts, and walk away unscathed. She didn't realize that the very piece of paper she once signed in love would become the blade I'd use to cut her free from everything she stole. That prenup was her idea. The revenge would be mine. After Eleanor left that morning, the house felt different, not emptier, just quieter, like the walls were holding their breath with me. I'd stopped being the man who asked why. Now I only thought about how. I had all the pieces: the affair, the stolen money, the prenup. What I didn't have was timing. That was going to be everything. And then fate handed me the perfect stage: Emily's wedding. The thought came to me late one night, as Linda scrolled through her iPad beside me, showing me color palettes for centerpieces and band options, her voice honey sweet, her fingers glinting with the bracelet Matt had bought her. "Frank," she said, "we should really make this day unforgettable." I smiled. "Oh, I promise, sweetheart. No one will ever forget it." That night, I began my quiet war. I told Linda I wanted her and Matt to help with the wedding plans. "You two are better at details," I said, pretending not to notice the flicker of guilt that crossed her face before she replaced it with a practiced smile. She bought it, the whole act. The wounded husband trying to patch the family back together. Matt bought it too, showing up at our house with that fake professional grin, shaking my hand a little too firmly. He even had the audacity to call me Frank, old buddy. Every time I saw him, I pictured that night outside the office, his hand on Linda's back, his smirk when she laughed at something only they shared. But I didn't let it show. I played my part like a seasoned actor in a show he didn't know I wrote. While they planned floral arrangements and tastings, I was meeting with Carl, my investigator, in a dim booth at the Harbor Inn. He handed me a thick envelope. Inside were photographs, time-stamped receipts, hotel registrations, even security footage from the spa in Rhode Island. "You've got more than enough," he said, sliding me a USB drive. "If this goes to court, she doesn't stand a chance." I nodded. "It's not court I'm after, Carl. It's clarity." He raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask. Men like him didn't need the details. The next step was my daughter. Emily had always been the heart of everything good in my life. Bright, kind, too forgiving for her own good. She reminded me of Linda before the greed and deceit dulled her edges. One afternoon, Emily came by, her eyes red and her hands trembling slightly as she set a folder on the counter. "Dad, can I ask you something? Mom wants me to sign this." I took the folder. Inside was a trust agreement filled with legal jargon and fine print. A document meant to protect marital gifts and inheritance in case of future financial disputes. But one line stood out immediately: the trustee name, Sunrise Holdings, LLC. I felt my stomach twist. "Where did she get this?" she said. "It's just a safety net," Emily said, her voice cracking. "That it'll make the financial stuff easier when Mark and I buy our first home." But she was weird about it, pushing me to sign fast. I forced a calm smile, though my blood was running cold. "Did you sign anything yet?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "I told her I wanted you to look at it first." She got upset, said I shouldn't always run to you for approval. I put my hand on hers. "You did the right thing." She looked up at me, eyes shining with conviction. "Dad, what's going on? You and Mom have been strange lately. Are you two okay?" I wanted to tell her everything about the affair, the theft, the way her mother was trying to drag her into it, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not before I could protect her legally. So I told her the only truth I could give. "Sweetheart, sometimes the people we love the most make choices that hurt everyone around them. But it's not your fault. Just promise me one thing: don't sign anything until I say it's safe." She nodded slowly, biting her lip. "Okay." When she left that evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the trust document open before me. My hands rested on either side of it like it was a bomb I couldn't defuse. Because that's exactly what it was. A trap Linda and Matt had built, and now they were trying to pull our daughter into it. That changed everything. Up until that moment, I'd been fighting to reclaim what was mine. Now it was about protecting what was ours. Over the next few weeks, I refined my plan. Carl continued gathering evidence, recorded phone calls, GPS logs, even security footage of Linda and Matt leaving his condo late at night. Eleanor handled the legal groundwork, quietly filing documents under sealed counsel to prevent Linda from moving any assets. Meanwhile, I smiled through dinner parties, wedding meetings, and family brunches, pretending life was back to normal. Linda was radiant again, laughter, loud eyes bright. She thought she'd won. Matt was worse. He'd started calling me partner in public again, like he could erase what I knew with a handshake. Let them plan the wedding. Let them toast to family. Let them stand under those chandeliers, believing they were unmatchable. Because I was planning something too, not for destruction, but for revelation. They'd made Emily's wedding their playground, their victory lap. But I'd turned it into a courtroom. Every guest, every speech, every camera would bear witness to what they'd built and how it would crumble. They thought the wedding would be their victory. I made sure it would be their trial. The Vermont estate was the kind of place that belonged on a postcard. White columns, glass chandeliers, acres of pine whispering in the wind. The perfect setting for a perfect lie. 60 guests, family, friends, and every person who still believed we were the Mitchells, the couple that had it all. I wore a gray suit, polished shoes, the same calm expression I'd practiced in the mirror for weeks. Linda, on the other hand, looked like she'd just stepped out of a luxury magazine. Her champagne gown shimmered under the lights, a diamond necklace resting against skin I no longer recognized. And right beside her, laughing easily with the guests, was Matt Reynolds, my trusted business partner, invited as a friend of the family. He played his part well, shaking hands, smiling wide, thanking me for having him. I watched him pour Linda a glass of wine, his hand brushing hers like a secret handshake they thought no one could see. But I saw everything, every smile, every wince, every lie. Emily looked radiant, nervous, happy, too young to understand that the world she knew was about to collapse. I'd done everything to protect her from what was coming, but some truths can't be softened. Dinner began. Laughter, toasts, the sound of forks against china. For a few minutes, I almost believed in the illusion again. Almost. Then Linda rose from her chair, glass in hand, her eyes sweeping the room like she was about to make a speech everyone would remember. "Can I have everyone's attention?" she said, her voice bright, almost trembling with excitement. "I want to say something honest from the heart." She reached for Matt's hand. He didn't hesitate. Their fingers intertwined right there under the chandeliers. "I think it's time we stop pretending," she began, her voice carrying easily through the hall. "Frank and I, we've grown apart. We've had 30 years of a good marriage, but sometimes love changes. Sometimes it fades." There was a murmur, confused, uncomfortable. Someone's fork clattered onto a plate. Linda's smile widened, defiant and glowing under the golden lights. "I found someone who makes me feel alive again," she said, her gaze sliding toward Matt. "And I won't apologize for choosing happiness." For a second, no one breathed. Emily's face went white. Then the tears came fast, hot, unstoppable. Her husband tried to pull her close, but she pushed him away, shaking her head. "Mom, not here. Not now." Linda didn't even look at her. She was watching me, waiting. I stood up slowly, chair legs scraping the floor. My pulse didn't quicken. My voice didn't shake. "Thank you for the honesty," I said, loud enough for every person in the room to hear. "Now here's mine." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a thick ivory envelope, the same one I'd carried for weeks. I set it down in front of her just beside her untouched dessert plate. Her smile faltered. "What's this?" "Something you should have read before standing up," I said. For a moment, no one moved. Linda's hand trembled slightly as she slid a manicured finger under the seal and pulled out the documents. I watched her eyes move across the pages, the evidence photos, the financial statements, the certified copies of the transfers from the company account. Then, at the very end, the neatly stapled divorce petition and the court order, freezing all shared assets. The color drained from her face. Matt leaned closer, confused. "What is it?" he whispered. Linda's voice broke. You froze everything." I said. "Nothing. You ruined us," she screamed suddenly, her voice cracking, echoing against the marble walls. Gasps rippled through the room. Guests turned stunned. "No," I said quietly. "You did that all by yourself." She looked at me, like she was seeing me for the first time, not the soft, forgiving husband she'd mocked behind closed doors, but something colder. Someone she couldn't manipulate anymore. I turned to Emily. Her eyes were wide, full of tears and shock, but behind them, I saw something else: relief. The truth, though brutal, had finally taken shape. I put a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "It's over, kiddo." Then I buttoned my jacket, nodded once to the crowd, and walked out. No yelling, no scenes, just the quiet click of my shoes against the tile, the sound of my daughter's sobs fading behind me, and Linda's voice breaking into the night. "Frank, you can't do this." But I already had. The cold Vermont air hit my face as I stepped outside, the stars sharp and distant above the black pines. The night smelled like rain and endings. Behind me, through the tall glass windows, the party had collapsed into chaos. Servers, frozen guests, whispering. Matt gripping the papers with shaking hands. Linda slumped in her chair like a puppet whose strings had finally been cut. For the first time in years, I felt free. News travels fast in small towns, faster when there's scandal mixed in. By Monday morning, everyone in Vermont with a cup of coffee and a smartphone had heard about the Mitchell wedding fiasco. It was the kind of story that people pretended to whisper about while making sure everyone else could hear. The headlines weren't kind. Businessman exposes wife's affair during daughter's wedding dinner. Local real estate firm under investigation for financial misconduct. Matt's downfall came faster than even I expected. By the end of the week, our board of directors had called an emergency meeting. The moment they saw the documents, I provided the transfers, the shell accounts, the stolen funds. The vote was unanimous. His shares were frozen pending full investigation. The partnership agreement was dissolved. 2 days later, I got a call from one of our senior agents. They escorted him out, Frank. Security and everything. He looked like hell. Good. Let him feel what he made me feel: exposed, humiliated, disposable. As for Linda, the silence was almost theatrical. For days, nothing. Then came the texts, short pleading bursts between waves of denial. "We need to talk. It's not what you think. Frank, please, let's fix this." I didn't reply. I couldn't. Not because I wanted to hurt her, but because there was nothing left to say. Eleanor had already filed the court orders. Every joint account, every credit line, every asset linked to Linda or Matt was frozen by law. She tried calling the bank. They redirected her to her attorney. She tried calling mine. He told her the truth. The prenup had activated in full. The house was mine. The company was mine. Every cent she'd stolen was now evidence, not property. For the first time in decades, Linda Mitchell was left with nothing she could buy her way out of. Emily stopped talking to her mother after that night. She didn't yell or accuse, she just went quiet. There's a kind of silence that carries more weight than anger ever could, and that's the one Emily chose. A week after the wedding, She showed up at my door with a duffel bag and red eyes. "Can I stay here for a while?" she asked. "You don't have to ask," I said. "This is still your home." She tried to smile, but couldn't. I didn't press her for details, didn't ask what Linda had said or how their last conversation went. Some wounds don't need words. That night, we sat on the porch with mugs of coffee, not speaking, just listening to the crickets. I remember her whispering, "You didn't deserve any of this, Dad." And I remember saying, "Nobody does, kiddo." But sometimes surviving is the closest thing we get to justice. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in years, the house didn't feel haunted anymore. Weeks turned into months. The legal process ground on, slow, methodical, merciless. The investigators found everything: offshore transfers, fake invoices, property deeds in Florida. Matt tried to deny it all, but the numbers didn't lie. Numbers never do. His career was finished. He'd been blacklisted from every major brokerage within the state. Rumor had it he'd moved to Miami, chasing whatever scraps were left of the fortune they tried to build from my back. Linda stayed in town for a while, living with a friend, maybe out of shame, maybe out of stubbornness. She called a few times from numbers I didn't recognize. I let every one of them ring. One evening, she left a voicemail. "I'll never forget it. I never wanted to hurt you, Frank. I just wanted to feel alive again. Please, can we talk?" Her voice cracked on the last word. For a second, I almost felt the old instinct, the urge to fix things, to comfort. But that man didn't exist anymore. Because I finally understood something. When someone destroys your trust, you don't owe them closure. You owe yourself peace. One night, I sat alone in the house, the same house we'd built together, surrounded by framed photographs on the mantel. Linda holding baby Emily. The three of us at Disney World, 20 years younger, smiling like the future was invincible. The silence was heavy, but it wasn't hostile anymore. Just still. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and watched the reflection of those old pictures in the window. The moonlight caught my face in the glass, and for a second, I saw the man I used to be, the one who thought loyalty guaranteed love. I lifted the glass slightly, almost like a toast. "I didn't win," I said quietly to no one in particular. "I just stopped losing." And in that simple truth, I finally felt free. 6 months can feel like a lifetime when everything you thought you were collapses, and you have to build yourself from the ground up. After the lawyers, the paperwork, the endless hearings, I found myself sitting in an empty office one morning, sunlight slanting through the blinds, dust motes drifting in the air. My name was still on the frosted glass. Frank Mitchell Realty. I ran my hand over the letters and smiled just a little. The company wasn't gone. It had just shed its dead weight. Eleanor agreed to come on board as a consultant. Only part-time, she warned me, handing over a stack of reorganized files. "I'm retired, not resurrected." "Fair enough," I said. "I just need someone who keeps me from making stupid decisions." "You mean another Linda," she said dryly. We both laughed, not bitterly, but the way survivors laugh when the worst has already happened and they've lived to tell it. The new company was smaller, leaner. No lavish offices, no luxury cars in the parking lot. Just me, 2 loyal agents, and Eleanor, keeping us honest. For the first time in years, I felt like the business was mine. Again, built not on charm or illusion, but on clarity and purpose. And maybe, just maybe, on peace. Around that same time, the local community center reached out. They'd heard about my story, not the scandalized version in the papers, but the quieter one that had spread among friends and neighbors. They asked if I'd consider teaching a short course on financial awareness for divorced men. I laughed at first. "You want the guy who just got publicly humiliated to teach finance?" The director smiled. We want the guy who survived it. So I said yes. Every Tuesday evening, a handful of men in their 50s and 60s gathered in a small room with bad fluorescent lighting and coffee that could peel paint. We talked about more than numbers, about trust, fears, starting over. Some of them had lost everything to bad investments. Others had lost their families. But we all shared one thing. We'd been naive enough to think love was a contract you could sign once and never revisit. I told them the same thing I'd learned the hard way, that knowledge is armor. That knowing where your money goes, who controls it, and how to rebuild it is not cynicism. It's self-respect. One night, a man named Peter, soft-spoken, newly divorced, said, "Frank, how do you stop hating the person who broke you?" I thought about it for a long moment. You don't start with forgiveness, I said. You start with understanding that you can't rewrite what happened, but you can decide what kind of man you'll be after it. That's the part she doesn't get to touch. He nodded, tears in his eyes. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was helping someone instead of defending myself. Emily and her husband had settled in Burlington, a quiet town an hour away. They came by every Sunday, bringing homemade bread and noise back into my house. One evening, she said, "Dad, there's a cottage for sale right across the street from us. You should think about moving closer." I hesitated. The house I lived in still carried echoes of the life I'd lost. But when I looked at her, her hand resting protectively on the curve of her belly, my first grandchild on the way, I realized some invitations aren't about distance. They are about starting again. A month later, I bought the cottage. Small, modest, bright. The kind of place where quiet doesn't feel empty. Sometimes I sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset settle over the lake, the air smelling like pine and second chances. I think about all the years I spent trying to build a life around someone else's idea of love, and how in the end, I only found peace when I started building around my own. I don't hate Linda anymore. I don't wish her harm, and I don't wish her well. She's just gone. A lesson wrapped in a lifetime. And that's enough. Because forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about them. It's how you free yourself. A full year passed before I heard from her again. It was a Sunday morning in early spring, that kind of soft Vermont light that makes even the air feel forgiving. I was in my kitchen rolling pie dough for the class I'd be teaching later that afternoon when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. But something, maybe habit, maybe closure, made me swipe the screen. Frank. Her voice. Older somehow. Fragile around the edges like a photo left out in the rain. "Linda," I said evenly. "I didn't think you'd pick up." I almost didn't. She laughed, a small cracked sound. "I was hoping we could talk. Just once, in person." I hesitated, the silence is stretching long enough for the coffee machine to finish its cycle. I could have hung up. Should have. But part of me knew this was a door that needed closing properly this time. "Same cafe as always?" I asked. She exhaled, almost relieved. "Yeah. 11 o'clock. Fine." The place hadn't changed. The same chipped tiles, the same scratched jazz record, looping quietly from the corner speaker. A lifetime ago, we'd sat in that very booth, planning the future. Now we were two strangers meeting in the ruins of what used to be home. Linda was already there when I arrived. No diamond necklace, no designer bag. Just a plain gray coat, and Waldas that fidgeted with a paper cup. She'd lost weight, and something else, something harder to name. "Frank," she said, forcing a smile. "You look good." "Thanks." I sat down, keeping my tone calm, polite, the way you speak to someone you've forgiven, but can never trust again. She stared at me for a while, searching for an opening. "Matt's gone," she said finally. "Took what little I had left and ran off with some client in Tampa." I nodded once. Sounds like his style. I know you probably don't care, but I lost everything. The house, the accounts, the business connections. I'm renting a tiny apartment off Main Street now. Can barely afford the utilities. I'm sorry to hear that. I said. And I was not for her, but for the small human part of me that still remembered the woman she'd been before. Greed hollowed her out. Her eyes filled with something like shame. You really did rebuild, didn't you? Everyone in town says your new firm's doing great. And that class you teach, I saw the article in the paper. I smiled faintly. Yeah, it's honest work. Keeps me grounded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The smell of roasted coffee hung between us like old ghosts. Then she asked it, the question I'd known was coming. Do you ever miss me? I looked at her, really looked. The woman who'd once shared my dreams, my name, my betrayals, and who'd set it all on fire without ever looking back. Sometimes I said quietly, but I miss the man I was, before I let you define me even more. Her breath caught. She didn't argue. She just nodded, eyes glassy, staring into her coffee, like it might show her a life that never happened. When I stood to leave, she didn't try to stop me. Just whispered, I hope you find peace, Frank. I already did. I said. And I meant it. That evening, I was back in my kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and baked apples filling the air. I'd promised my class a pie tonight, financial lessons and comfort food, I called it. It felt right. Somehow teaching men how to protect their futures while handing them something warm, something made by hand. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the steam curling upward like a prayer. From the corner of the counter, sunlight caught an old manila envelope, the same one that had once held every piece of evidence, every weapon of my revenge. It was empty now. I smiled, folded it in half, and slid it into the drawer with the old photo albums, not as proof, not as pain, but as closure. The record player crackled softly to life. Miles Davis kind of blue. The trumpet floated through the room like forgiveness itself. I took my coffee to the porch, watching the horizon blush with the first light of dawn. The air was cool, clean, alive. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't think about loss or anger or even justice. I just existed. Free. Because in the end, the best revenge isn't making them suffer. It's living well enough that you don't need to. The sun rose higher, painting the lake gold. I lifted my cup, took a slow sip, and let the warmth settle deep into my chest. The manila envelope glowed faintly in the morning light, empty, weightless, forgiven. A full stop at the end of a long, hard sentence. You know, people keep asking me if I ever regret it. The way I exposed her, the way I walked away, without looking back. And the truth is, no, I don't regret a damn thing. Because sometimes life doesn't hand you justice wrapped in a courtroom verdict or an apology that comes too late. Sometimes justice is just waking up in the morning and realizing you're free. Free from lies, free from pretending, free from the version of yourself that kept begging to be loved by the wrong person. If you've ever been betrayed, listen to me, don't chase revenge, build peace. Build a life so honest, so strong, that it makes their betrayal look small. I'm Frank Mitchell, and if this story found you tonight, maybe it's because it's your turn to start again. Tell me where you're listening from, and remember, the best revenge is living well enough that you don't need any.